What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another review, and this time we're taking a look at Wonder Woman 1984, the sequel to the 2017 movie. This film is once again directed by Patty Jenkins and starring Gal Gadot, and it is the 8th installment into the DCEU slash Synderverse. Okay, let's waste no time. Let's get right into it. Wonder Woman 84 is a very mixed bag movie. It has things that I really liked, and it has things that I absolutely didn't like. Let me get into the things that I liked. Number one, the cast in this movie is once again very solid. Now, I will never classify myself as a huge Gal Gadot fan, especially as a character of Wonder Woman. However, with that being said, she does try. She really does try. And I think I liked her more in this movie than I did in her own solo movie, than I did in the first solo movie. I think Gal Gadot in the sequel this time around, she's much more comfortable in the role of Wonder Woman slash Diana Prince. And she actually did get a chance to show off some range a little bit in this movie. Once again, her chemistry with Chris Pine is one of the saving graces of this movie. And when I get to my negatives, you'll see why. But yeah, like I like Gal Gadot this time around in the sequel. I think she's more comfortable in the role. She has a lot of really good emotional scenes, and there are a couple of scenes where she got some chuckles out of me. So I think Gal Gadot this time around was actually much better in the role of in the lead role. I'm still not a fan of her Wonder Woman, but at least she's trying. Speaking of Chris Pine, yes, Chris Pine is back as Steve Trevor. The convolutedness of how he came back, I will get to in the negatives. But just as an overall performance, I like Chris Pine. I've liked Chris Pine as an actor since I first saw him in Star Trek '09, and I like him now. He's got that charming personality. He bounces off really well with Gal Gadot. See, Gal Gadot really shines when she's acting off Chris Pine, and they really do have very good on-screen chemistry with one another. And just seeing Chris Pine back in the role of Steve Trevor, it was nice. It was nice because I liked him in the role in the first movie, and I like seeing him come back. Like I said, it was very contrived as to how he got brought back, but I like what the story tried to do in terms of Diana's evolution as a character. The supporting cast that surrounds these two, you have Kristen Wiig, who plays Barbara Minerva, aka Cheetah, who was a famous Wonder Woman villain. Kristen Wiig, she was okay in this movie. I wouldn't say she was the best part because she wasn't. Her character arc is very similar to Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman in Batman Returns, in which she's this meek woman who then by strange ways becomes a strong woman, and then by the end she turns into a cat-like warrior creature type thing. Yeah, Barbara Minerva's character arc in this movie is very paint by numbers, and they also have forced catcalling and forced bad man representation in this movie, to which I'm looking at, I'm cringing in my seat because and like I said, Kristen Wiig, her performance in this movie is nothing really all that spectacular. Hell, it's not even really all that memorable. It's just Kristen Wiig acting like Kristen Wiig. It's the most just. You could have swapped out Kristen Wiig and put anyone in the role, and it would not have made one big of a difference, because the way the character is written, she was never going to stand out. And when I talk about the third act and how she looks as Cheetah, yikes! Like, just yikes. Yeah, Kristen Wiig, she was mediocre. Pedro Pascal plays Maxwell Lord, who is essentially the lead villain of this movie. I like Pedro Pascal as an actor, and I liked him in this movie. He like Kristen Wiig, he didn't put on a fantastic performance, but for the context of this movie, the performance was nice. He came across as very charming, very cunning businessman, but also has like a brokenness to him. Like he's insecure in a way. And I thought Pedro Pascal played the performance really well, especially when he gets this artifact known as a Dreamstone, and he becomes one with it. You get to see his mental deterioration, and it's not till the end of the movie where he sees the errors of his way. So yeah, I thought that stuff was okay. I thought the stuff with his son was decently handled. Not the greatest thing in the world, but it gave him more humanity because he has a son, and he's trying essentially. Maxwell Lord is trying to be a role model to his son and trying not to have his son see him as a failure. That's basically Maxwell Lord's story in this movie. It's that he views himself as a failure, and he doesn't want his son to see him as such. Hence why he becomes a megalomaniac when he becomes born with the Dreamstone. So yeah. You also have an appearance by a character called Simon Stagg, who is from the comics. He doesn't really do much. He has a little bit of a rivalry with Maxwell Lord. I would have liked to see more of an expansion on this instead of what this movie chose to focus on for the majority of it. Yeah, it is what it is. And the other supporting cast members, you know, they whatever. So yeah, they're whatever. In terms of the production values, this movie is actually, you know, it's competently made. It is. I thought the first movie was actually visually better. This movie is really good visually as well. You know, it's got a nice bright color palette. Even though I don't understand why this movie took place in the 80s, Patty Jenkins did a decent job at recreating that mid-80s aesthetic. So that was okay. So that was pretty cool. She clearly took a lot of inspiration from Richard Donner's Superman, because this movie has a lot of goofy moments to it, and it almost makes you feel like, how the hell does this fit into the DCEU Synderverse as a whole? Because the tone that man set pretty much is a tone of room for very little goofiness. The first 20 minutes of this movie is full blown, like, hey, I'm watching a Wonder Woman movie that could have been made in 1978, because it's very goofy. The music is very goofy. It's very playful and very colorful. So yeah, it's kind of a mix. It's kind of a jarring departure in a way when you look at it. So, but yeah, aesthetically, Jenkins and her team did a decent job at recreating the 1980s look and atmosphere. So I give her that. In terms of the overall action sequences that are in this movie, they're okay. They're very, very few and far between. The best action set piece is when we see Wonder Woman taking out thugs in a mall. That was entertaining. And then we don't see Wonder Woman suit up until 80 minutes later, when she's in Egypt, in a very over-the-top and just goofy highway car chase scene, in which it feels like you're watching a movie that was made in 1975. That's how goofy and ridiculous it looked. And it literally takes you out of the movie when you see Gal Gadot running behind a green screen, and this movie did absolutely nothing to hide the fact that she's running behind a green screen. It looked ridiculous. It looked stupid. Listen, it worked in 1940. It ain't gonna work in 2020 when this movie was released. It was god awful. It looked like crap. And the whole third act was also just a bleh. That was also just meh. Like, only one action scene stood out. That was the mall scene. The other two action sequences, they weren't all that good. And okay, I lied. There's four, because the White House scene was also pretty decent as well. So okay, that's two decent action sequences in a movie that actually has 4 full-on action sequences. When half your action sequences are good and the other half are not good, that means you had a problem, because that means your focus is clearly elsewhere and not where it should be. So yeah, that's that. Okay. Now, I got my positives out of the way. Let's talk about the negatives. Number 1, this movie taking place in 1984 doesn't make any sense when you put it into the context of the Synderverse and Wonder Woman story that was established in BVS. It clearly states that in BVS, that after World War I, she hid away from the world for a century. Okay. How are you here in 1984? Not only that, you're in public. Everyone sees you. So you're going to tell me that by the time BVS comes around, nobody's going to remember seeing you? That doesn't make any sense. That's contradictory. Once again, this universe is constantly being broken, and the connective tissue is constantly being meddled with. I don't care if Patty Jenkins wanted to make a movie set in the 80s. I don't care. A Wonder Woman sequel, especially this movie, with the story you were telling, you could have easily placed it in the modern day. I think that would have made for a much more interesting story than having it take place in the 80s because you want to relive the 80s aesthetic and have Steve, hey, let's see Steve Trevor try on 80s clothes. No. I don't like it. The 80s, this movie taking place in the 80s doesn't make any sense to me, especially when you put it into the context of the greater DCEU universe, and it contradicts everything that Wonder Woman said to Bruce about how after World War One she hid away from the world. Now listen, I can buy the fact of Diana Prince living amongst us after World War One, but I do not buy the fact of her being Wonder Woman within that time frame, and no one knew about her once BVS came around. That doesn't make any sense to me. That is continuity breaking. That's stupid and it's dumb and I hate it. I did not like it whatsoever. But yeah, to me, this movie's biggest flaw is taking place in the 80s because it breaks continuity. It raises too many questions, and this movie should have took place in the modern day after Justice League. I think Steve Trevor in the modern day would have made for a much more interesting movie, seeing how he would handle the more modern day and how the modern day politics and how everything was done in his time is radically different from how everything is done in the more modern times. That's me. That's what I would have done. Another thing that I completely disliked. The lack of Wonder Woman in this movie is not good. Like I said, you have her, she does an action sequence in the mall for like 5 minutes, and then you don't see her again until the 70-minute mark. In that time, it's really her and Steve just trying to reconnect in the inverse of the first movie. That's what this is. This movie is pretty much an inverse of the first movie. In the first movie, it was Diana who was out of time in Steve's world. Now it's Steve out of time in Diana's world, which is the 1980s. And it pretty much goes that rom-com route for a very, very long time. Now, that's not to say it's not entertaining, because it is. And like I said earlier, Godot and Pine have really good on-screen chemistry with one another. And just seeing these two on screen, it very entertaining. But with that being said, are you trying to make a superhero movie, or are you trying to make a romance movie? I'm confused. Patty Jenkins, I am very confused what you're trying to do. You can still do the romance and the comedy, but you also got to remember, you're making a superhero movie first. So the superhero element has to come first. Instead, you do a radical departure, and pretty much the entire movie is just Steve and Diana just doing stuff. And they're not doing all that great stuff. Seeing Steve out of time can only be charming for so long until, okay, let's pick up the pace a little bit. Let's get some fighting going on. Let's get some Wonder Woman doing Wonder Woman things. Let's see more of an in-depth investigation as to what's going on with Maxwell Lord and how now that he has his Dreamstone and all these random things are happening. It's like it takes way too long to get to the point of what's going on, and and that's another thing with this movie, that the pacing is very sluggish. This movie can be extremely boring in a lot of areas. Even when you get to some of the fight scenes can drag on for way longer than they should, and they get very tedious to sit through. I know, I just said that when I go to a superhero movie, I want to see action sequences, but I want to see really good paced action sequences. Example, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. That is a movie with a lot of action sequences, but those action sequences are well paced. They have good tension and good buildup. The action sequences in this movie is just things going on with really no tension, really no buildup. It's just Patty, and listen, and that has a lot to do with Patty Jenkins. Patty Jenkins is not an action director. She's a character-driven director. And that shows more with this movie than it did in the first movie. When you give someone like that too much creative control, they're going to strip away a lot of what they're going to strip away a lot, and then they're going to double down on what they know, and it's going to make for a very uneven movie. This is why you shouldn't give directors too much creative control, and especially when you're in the superhero realm, because, listen, yes, we want to see more introspective moments with our heroes, but at the same time, we want to have a nice even balance of those personal moments and those action sequences that make us want to see these movies. Wonder Woman does not do a good job of balancing that. Like I said, it's more focused on, a good chunk of the movie is more focused on Diana and Steve, and not so much on what's going on, and not so much of the overall storyline of Maxwell Lord and the action that precedes it. And another thing that I didn't like about this movie, like I said, Kristen Wiig as Barbara Minervera, she was okay, but her storyline is very weak. And when she actually looks like she does, she looks completely ridiculous. She literally looks like a reject from the movie Cats. and it's painfully hilarious. This is an instance where you should have just created a full-blown CG character that looked more closer to her comic book's counterpart, in where she looks ferocious. Instead, she looks like she's going trick-or-treating, and it looks painfully ugly. I mean, it looks like crapola, garbage. Another thing, this movie had a 10-minute prologue. A 10-minute prologue, in which at the end of the day, it's just Wonder Woman's mom and aunt telling her that cheating is not the way to go. It took 10 minutes just to get to that message. You could have easily taken that prologue out, condensed it to 2 minutes, and it would have greatly fixed some of the pacing problems with this movie. That prologue was completely unnecessary. It did absolutely nothing. That opening prologue of young Diana with her mom and aunt did absolutely nothing but just bloat this movie more than what it really is. How I would have fixed the pacing of this movie. This movie goes on for 2.5 hours. Listen, Aquaman to me had an issue of being bloated, but at least Aquaman had James Wan, who did a good mix of balancing out his story and balancing out the action and making it flow in a coherent way. Patty Jenkins, she's not James Wan. She does not have the talent of a James Wan. She's not capable of doing that. Patty Jenkins' idea, because at least James Wan was still telling his story during the action sequences, so at least there was something going on. Patty Jenkins, her idea is, let me stop my story to a screeching halt, focus, do some goofy stuff for like forever, and then when I feel like I'll go back to telling the story. That's a big pacing problem, and that's what makes Wonder Woman a slug of a movie to sit through, because it stops for a long time, it crawls for a long time, it takes forever to get to the point sometimes, and by the time you get to the third act, you're just waiting for this movie to end. But when you look at your watch, you're like, oh my god, we're only an hour and a half in, and there's still another hour to go. I mean, like, it's ridiculous. This movie did not need to be 2.5 hours. This movie needed to be, with the story this movie's telling, 2 hours and 5 minutes, or 2 hours and 10 minutes would have told the exact same story. But number one, you would have cut out the prologue, you would have trimmed down a lot of the rom-com scenes and just do the greatest hits of them, but condense them. You would have made it more, and you would have had a more tighter paced movie instead of this bloated movie that takes forever to get to the point. Oh, yeah. And yeah, that's it. That's pretty much it. That's how I would fix Wonder Woman 84. Take out the prologue, trim down a lot of the scenes, and it would have been much more tighter paced. Instead, this movie stretched out longer than it should be, and at the end of the day, it's not really telling that much of an interesting story. It's basically telling you, don't be selfish. Even though you want the things you want, you have to let go of these things. And none of that is more prevalent than in Steve and Diana's last scene, which, to Patty Jenkins' credit, is a really good scene, very emotional, and Diana forcing herself to let go of Steve was really heart-wrenching. And the fact that Steve and Diana will always have a love for each other is also very nice. But you have to sit through a lot of movies just to get to that part. And then the final battle, like I said, the final battle is not much of a final battle. Earlier in the movie, Steve Trevor finds the golden Wonder Woman suit. Diana tells him a story about a famous Amazon named Artemisia who once donned that suit to save Themyscira from man. Diana wears it. It looks goofy, to be honest with you. The fight scene with Cheetah is very lackluster and underwhelming. None of that. You can't fucking see what's happening because it takes place in the dark. And they blend in. So you're like, you gotta squint to see, hey, what's happening with Cheetah and Wonder Woman? I don't know. And then you have Wonder Woman and Max having a little conversation while Max has the Dream Stone within him until he finally rescinds his wish, and then everything goes back to normal, and thank God this movie's over. And you get a mid-credit scene with Artemisia in the present day, played by Linda Carter, the original Wonder Woman. That was a nice little cameo. So yeah, like I said, Wonder Woman 1984, on a second viewing, my thoughts on it really have changed, to be honest with you. It's a movie that has some good things in it, but it's a movie that's outweighed by a lot of bad things. And in the end, I'm just going to give this thing the grade that I gave before, which is a 5 out of 10. This movie is not offensively bad. It's a movie of wasted potential. It's a movie that should not have taken place in the 1980s. It should have taken place more in the modern day. If you trim a lot of the fat, It would have fixed the pacing issues that I had with it, and would have fixed more story elements with it. But yeah, for what we got, 5 out of 10. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Wonder Woman 1984. Let me know your thoughts in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.